Hey, welcome back to Well, That's Interesting. Another chapter of American history you most likely never learned in school edition. Today is a bonus. We need to talk about the people of the Great Dismal Swamp. My friends, will you look at the date? If you're listening to this on the day of its glorious release, then you know tomorrow is Juneteenth. As the National Museum of African American History and Culture website so elegantly states, June 19th is our country's second Independence Day. Although it has long been celebrated in the African American community, this monumental event remains largely unknown to most Americans. On Freedom's Eve, or the eve of January 1st, 1863, the first Watch Night services took place. On that night, enslaved and free African Americans gathered in churches and private homes all across the country, awaiting news that the Emancipation Proclamation had taken effect. At the stroke of midnight, prayers were answered as all enslaved people in the Confederate States were declared legally free. Union soldiers, many of whom were black, marched onto plantations and across cities in the South reading small copies of the Emancipation Proclamation, spreading the news of freedom. Only through the 13th Amendment did emancipation end slavery throughout the United States. End quote. And side note, yes, for those yelling into the ether right now, I hear you, and you are correct. The 13th Amendment does have an exception. The U.S. Constitution permits forced labor as punishment for a crime. Federal and state prison work is mandatory for able-bodied inmates and pays at most 40 cents an hour. This is a massive issue facing our country, and I wanted to acknowledge that, but right now it's Juneteenth. Which means what exactly? Well, not all enslaved people on January 1st, 1863 were free. Quote, even though the Emancipation Proclamation was made effect, it could not be implemented in places still under Confederate control. As a result, in the westernmost Confederate state of Texas, enslaved people would not be free until 2 years later. Freedom finally came on June 19th, 1865, when some 2,000 Union troops arrived in Galveston Bay, Texas. The Army announced that more than 250,000 enslaved black people in the state were free by executive decree. This day came to be known as Juneteenth by the newly freed people in Texas. The historical legacy of Juneteenth shows the value of never giving up hope in uncertain times. End quote. From nmaach.si.edu. And I got fucking chills. And I cannot encapsulate the importance and the history leading up to this day in one bonus, but I can focus on one particular part of it. Prior to 1865, for those wishing to flee enslavement and took the perilous risk of escape, they needed to find a refuge safe from professional slave catchers, patrols, and private bounty hunters hired by enslavers. One of these places was the Great Dismal Swamp. And for my fellow geographically challenged and historically challenged Americans, don't worry, I've got you. Please everyone imagine the neighboring states of Virginia located atop North Carolina. Thank you. Point to the border they share and move your finger all the way to the right until you nearly hit the Atlantic Ocean. Perfect. Once upon a time, here, the Great Dismal Swamp was estimated to be at over 1 million acres. But as of 2022, the size of the swamp is around 480,000. And we'll get into why in a minute. At the heart of the swamp is Lake Drummond, a 3,100-acre freshwater life-giving source whose origins are not entirely clear, as there's no apparent network of natural streams emptying into the lake. Perhaps the Powhatan, or the indigenous tribe, had something to do with it, as archaeological evidence suggests their empire extended to the northern edge of the Great Dismal Swamp for at least 13,000 years. That is, until the time of the settling of Jamestown in the year 1600. Long violent story short, this was when Native American communities began fleeing into the swamp for refuge from the colonial frontier. As we are about to hear in one of the most watched TED-Ed talks of 2021, this swamp not only protected the indigenous, but those escaping the horrors of enslavement for hundreds of years thereafter. It is my honor to fire up The Secret Society of the Great Dismal Swamp, a 5-minute video about recent archaeological findings that finally prove that this place, despite the name, was in fact a living, breathing city for the targeted. Oh, and speaking of which, the name, it was given by William Byrd II while leading a land survey to establish a boundary between the Virginia and North Carolina colonies. In 1728, he entered this swamp, and I assume it somehow ruined his elaborate wig. And I'm not kidding. If you drop whatever hairpiece you're holding right now and pick up your phone to tap on today's post, you will see what I mean. His portrait is giving 1700s arrogance. Anyway, what I mean to say is that he found the swamp to be so uninhabitable, he labeled it, quote, dismal. Well, dismal is in the eye of the beholder. As American University researcher Daniel Sayers said it best in an interview with the Smithsonian, quote, there were hardships and deprivations for sure, but no overseer was going to whip them here. No one was going to work them in a cotton field until sunup to sundown or sell their spouses and children. They were free. They had emancipated themselves. End quote. So let's hear more about this, shall we? The Secret Society of the Great Dismal Swamp. I'll have screenshots of highlights over at the socials as well. But in the meantime, hi, I'm Jill Chacha, and if this is your first time listening, welcome to the flock, my dear sweet business goose. A full episode drops next week, and I'm going to need you to buckle up in advance. Here we go. The 2021 TED Ed Talk, The Secret Society of the Great Dismal Swamp.
Straddling Virginia and North Carolina is an area that was once described as the most repulsive of American possessions. By 1728, it was known as the Great Dismal Swamp. But while many deemed it uninhabitable, recent findings suggest that a hidden society persisted in the swamp until the mid-1800s. So, who lived there, and what happened to them? People long suspected that communities had settled in the swamp, but the historical record was spotty. It wasn't until 2003 that the first systematic archaeological foray finally launched. But despite having been extensively drained over the years, the wetland still presented many practical challenges. Researchers had to penetrate thorny thickets, wade through waters studded with sinkholes, and brave the threats of dangerous animals. After several months, they finally found islands in the swamp's interior. These formations quickly revealed traces of centuries-old secrets. Archaeologists found buried markings that appear to have been left by raised log cabins, fire pits, and basins that may have collected drinking water. They identified what seems to have been a palisade wall and excavated more than 3,000 artifacts, including weaponry, stone tools, and fragments of ceramic pipes and vessels. These discoveries, combined with previous findings, helped tell a story that reaches far back in time. Indigenous American people began regularly inhabiting or visiting the area around 11,000 BCE, before it was even a swampland. A second era of occupation began much later. In the early 1600s, more indigenous people came seeking refuge from colonization. And later that century, it seems that Maroons, or people escaping from slavery, began entering the area. In fact, the team's findings support the theory that the Great Dismal Swamp was home to the largest Maroon settlement in all of North America. Because their success and survival depended on staying hidden from the outside world, these swamp communities were largely self-sufficient. Based on primary sources, historians believe that people cultivated grains and created homes, furniture, musical instruments, and more from the swamp's available resources. These organic materials had probably already decomposed by the time archaeologists came to investigate, but researchers were able to find more durable objects, like ceramic and stone items that were likely left by ancient indigenous people, then reused and modified by others later on. Around the turn of the 19th century, it seems the relationship between the swamp's community and the outside world changed. Lumber and manufacturing companies began encroaching on the swamp's interior. They brought thousands of free and enslaved workers to live in the swamp and made them harvest wood, excavate canals, and drain fields. Certain findings suggest that the swamp's hidden communities might have switched to a more defensive mode during this period, but researchers also observed more mass-produced objects from this time, indicating that trading was taking place. Researchers think that the secret swamp communities dispersed during or soon after the American Civil War, by the end of which slavery was abolished in the United States. Some people may have stayed in the swamp until they passed away, or left to settle elsewhere. Most of what we know about these hidden communities has come to light after archaeologists excavated sections of a single island. However, there may have been hundreds of habitable islands dotting the swamp's interior at the time. Between 1600 and 1860, many people lived in these hidden settlements. Some probably lived their entire lives within the swamp and never saw a white person, or experienced racial persecution in broader American society. Generations of Black Maroons and Indigenous Americans resisted slavery and colonization by creating an independent society in the heart of the Great Dismal Swamp. They fostered a refuge in what might seem like the unlikeliest of places, but one that was more hospitable than what lay outside. Today, this area offers a partial record of that secret, self-reliant world, imagined and built for survival and the preservation of freedom.
Well, god damn, I have chills again. There you have it. Another chapter of American history you most likely never learned about in school, the Great Dismal Swamp. May it and the people who thrive there inspire you. You can always use a little hope. And thank you for listening, rating, subscribing, telling your friends about something else they didn't learn in school in America. Yeah, and a beautiful thanks to the folks over at Airwave Media, the podcast network to which WTI belongs. If you love this show, and you do, you'll love the other podcasts in this family. And please, stay interesting.